At the very end of last year, just before we all went off on our holidays, the Ministry of Education announced that the social studies curriculum was changing to the new social science curriculum for this academic year. Now, there were no more details or information to follow until the beginning of this academic year. And so many schools have decided not to make the move, but to stick with the old social studies curriculum. However, at WSO, we have decided to make the change and move towards the new social science curriculum. And I wanted to explain the reasoning behind that. There are two reasons. The first reason is because actually the new social science curriculum isn't that different. But the second, and the most important, is because at WSO we are a pioneering school. We're innovative by our very nature, and we're comfortable moving into new spaces. We knew the old social studies curriculum, and we were very proud of what we'd managed to achieve with regards to teaching and learning, but we understood what we needed to do to make it even better. And we saw this change as an opportunity to achieve that, to further develop our social studies, social science curriculum. I always think it's really important to start with the why. So why is the social science curriculum so important to us at WSO? Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that we are a British curriculum school, and this is not part of the British curriculum. And in that, in some way, lies its strength. Now, I'm a big fan of the British curriculum, but it does suffer from having a very European perspective. But we are not based in Europe. We're not based in Britain. We're based in the UAE. And one thing that the social science curriculum does very well is represent our cohort. And it's really important that the education that our students are receiving represents them, their own history, their own identity. And actually, I think the social science curriculum has a really global mindset. Yes, it might often focus on UAE culture and heritage and history, but it asks them to compare it to their own as well. And which brings me to my second point. Almost all of the students that attend our school are third culture students, which means that they were born somewhere else, but they live here. Now, there are many benefits of being a third culture student. They tend to grow up to be very creative, divergent thinkers who collaborate well within diverse groups, are sensitive to the needs of others, and are very adaptable and flexible. However, there are drawbacks too. They tend to struggle with sense of identity and belonging. It's really important those students get to think, reflect, and connect with their own culture and heritage, but also the culture and heritage of where they live now, too. This will all inform their complex identity as they grow, and it's important that we make time within the curriculum for them to do that. Social science does that very well. So, why social science? To develop a student's connection with their own heritage and the rich culture and heritage of the UAE, to develop students' learning skills and create individuals who are able to access reliable information and share it in an authentic way, and to develop citizens who appreciate the benefits of belonging to a wide range of groups and communities and the responsibilities that this entails. I think it's really important to acknowledge and appreciate that within the UAE social science curriculum is a core subject, meaning it should have the same importance and the same weighting as English, maths, and science. In order for us to be legally compliant, we have to ensure that all students are learning the UAE social science curriculum for a minimum of 40 minutes per week from years 2 to 6. Now, I deliberately said all students learning for a minimum of 40 minutes. It's not that we teach it for a minimum of 40 minutes. All students have to have that 40 minutes exposure every week. So please be mindful of that when you're planning interventions and taking students away from the curriculum. It's also important that we are formally assessing the UAE social science curriculum, and we do that through Classroom Monitor. It's now our second year, and so we will now be able to start tracking progress, which will start to become very important for our inspections. At the very beginning of this training, I spoke briefly about our decision to move to the new curriculum. and how we'd seen that as an opportunity. And I believe that we've made the most of that opportunity. In order to do that, I created an action group of outstanding teachers and planners from each phase across the school. Together, we have created some very detailed midterm plans with links to all the resources and materials that you'll need in order to support you in the delivery of this subject in its first year. Now, before we created those midterm plans, we took some time to really reflect on our vision for the subject and develop that and develop our values. Now, you can see the values in the bottom right corner. It should be project-based. We agreed it should be innovative, that it should be collaborative, that it should involve child-led inquiry, and at its core, it should be purposeful. That meant that we could create a really coherent curriculum that could serve as a beacon for teaching and learning across our academy. When planning the midterm plans, they carefully put all of the objectives into projects and units. Because at its essence, our social science curriculum is a project-based approach, meaning from the very beginning of each unit, students should be aware what the final outcome is. It might be that they'll be creating a piece of artwork, it might be that they'll be creating an artifact to curate, it might be that they'll be creating a presentation to share. But they should know from the very start what the final outcome is, and very importantly, who the specific audience will be as well. Now, that could be children from another class in a year group or from another year group. It might be children from secondary. It might be that it's members of the primary leadership team who are the audience, the heads of houses. It might be that the audience is their families who get to come in, or that is shared digitally with them through Seesaw. But with our digital technology and the innovation aspect of this, communicating that final outcome can be global. So let's be really ambitious about how we do that. Because as a teacher, we're not always the most inspiring audience. It's always nice that students are keen to please us, but we have a very clear role. Our role is to identify the things that they can do and identify the things they need to do to get better. So having a specific audience beyond the teacher is really inspiring for the students, and it makes it relevant, it makes it purposeful, and it connects it to real life learning. So from the very beginning of the unit, students should be aware of what the final outcome is going to be and who the audience is. Finally, at the beginning of the unit, we would like everyone to complete an initial pink, think and wonder form. Now, everybody should be familiar with the initial pink thinking sheets, and we've basically created the wonder section so that students can start to develop that curiosity for the unit from the very start. Now, the UAE social science curriculum is formed of 6 different domains: the domain of history, geography, national education, economics, and my 2 favourite domains, communication of conclusions and the evaluation of sources and using evidence. Now, the reason they're my favourite of the domains is because they very clearly outline what our approach should be, and it's absolutely in line with our values. The evaluation of sources and using evidence tells us that this should heavily involve child-led inquiry, that students should be developing those explicit skills of acquiring information and creating knowledge with it. And what do they do with that knowledge? They communicate those conclusions. This is really critical. They analyse the information, they evaluate it, and then they communicate a reasoned response. And so we communicate those conclusions with a specific audience. Now, if you look at the midterm plans, you can see that those different domains are indicated by the colour of the objectives. So orange is history, red is the evaluation of sources and using evidence. Now, we have to cover 80% of the objectives this year. That's for compliance. And so on occasion, we'll be covering more than one objective at any one time. So you'll see lots of the red and purple objectives joining the history, geography, national education and economics. So this is how they're learning. Also, what you'll have noticed from the beginning of the first unit that we covered this year was You, Me, Learners in the UAE, where we looked at the UAE student profile themes. We've aligned those with our competencies, and I've put those on the midterm plan to indicate which are the best UAE student profile themes to cover in each lesson. It's really important that when we cover them through our competencies. So we can say today we'll be working on critical thinking and problem solving, but we're going to focus on the explorer and inquirer aspect of this today. We've also made adaptations to the UAE Social Science Planning Performer too, in order to emphasise key priorities for our subject. I think the first one that's worth drawing your attention to is the Classroom Monitor Objectives section. And here the planner will be explicit about what the opportunities for assessment are in each lesson. That's to encourage you to make regular assessments on Classroom Monitor. The next thing I think that's worth drawing your attention to are the competence and UE student profile focus section. Please here describe how you are going to develop the competencies in this lesson, not just what competence they're going to be doing. In social science, we want them to learn lots of information, of course, but we also want them to learn how to learn as well. So this is not something added to learn, this is how they learn and how that's being developed. So it will involve lots of reflection. There's an increasing emphasis on how we're adapting this curriculum to meet the needs of Emirati learners. So please look for opportunities for Emirati students to lead on the learning. Flipped learning tasks are a really good opportunity for students, Emirati students, to learn about aspects of their culture and heritage at home, and then to share that with the class as an expert in the lesson. In this example, from year 3, students did a flipped learning activity where they learnt about a key historical figure from their own heritage at home. Emirati students looked at Sheikh Zayed. Then when they looked at the impact in the following lesson of Sheikh Zayed on the unification of the UAE, they were able to take much more of a lead. Part of our assessment criteria is what level of Bloom's taxonomy the students are working at. So higher order questioning and scaffolding is a really important part of the plan. Here, we're requiring you not just to think about the why or the how questions, but the scaffolding necessary in order to ensure that students are analysing, evaluating before making a reasoned judgment. So don't just record the questions, but the sequence of questions that take place in order to get the students to that depth of thinking. Next is the green section, which indicates this is to be completed by the class teacher. This is personalisation and challenge. I've put some examples here or types of personalisation. So you can indicate that with yellow, and then you can give a very brief description about how you're going to personalise that specifically to your class. The assessment notes is really to record any students that need further attention, whether that be more challenge in the next lesson or a bit of intervention. And finally, I talked about the values for the social science subject at the beginning of the training. And here I want every planner to evaluate each plan against those values. As you can see, this planner has done an extraordinary job and they've evaluated themselves, I think, quite accurately in 4s and 5s. You don't have to be, each plan doesn't have to be at 4 or 5 each week. It might be that for innovation 1 week you've got 2 or even a 1, and that's all right. But it's just a case of keeping track, and if that's happening again and again and again, that you reflect on what you need to do to try and lift those to 4s and 5s going forward. And finally, assessment. We are legally required to formally assess all students from year 2 to year 6 in social sciences. And we do that using Classroom Monitor. We did that last year, and that's fairly well embedded now, although we listened to your feedback where you told me that it was quite difficult for you to assess the students using 6 broad learning goals across the year. And so we've broken those down now into the Ministry of Education objectives. And so you'll be assessing the students on 1 or 2 objectives in each lesson. It's really important that you're assessing the students regularly and that you're keeping that Classroom Monitor page up to date. The assessment should be individual and personal, not just a class or one block colour across the whole Classroom Monitor page. And we do require evidence to support your judgments. Last year, we found that initially the assessment was too modest and a bit conservative. And then when we commented on that, it became extremely generous and went the other way. Well, this is just natural, and it didn't help having the big learning goals, but we will need to moderate that carefully this year to get that right. That will play a big part in our next inspection. The criteria for assessment is fairly straightforward. We use Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking as our model. So if students are able to remember and they show they understand the learning, then that earns them an emerging plus. If they're able to apply the learning, do something with the learning, then that's expected. If they are using the analysing skills and evaluating skills in their learning, then they're exceeding. And if they are able to analyse and evaluate the learning and then create something, they are excelling. With the evidence, it's really important that it demonstrates the learning, not just the activity and what they did. All students have UE Social Studies Mixed Ability Portfolio. And the idea of that is it tracks the learning, what they understood at the beginning of the lesson and what they came to understand by the end of the lesson. We don't expect a pristine outcome for each lesson, because the idea of this project-based work is that we are logging the learning that is contextualized by the final outcome. And so that final outcome will be that pristine product. The portfolio is there to log that they are making progress. And don't forget, you can use that pink Think and Wonder sheet in each lesson if you want to track that progress and across the unit. But remember, it's really important we're showing what they learnt, not what they did. And finally, this is a core subject. It's really important that we follow the feedback procedure in portfolios for core subjects. So we do expect to see the highlighting, we do expect to see you getting next steps out of the children and getting and showing that you're extending their learning beyond the lesson. Thank you for taking the time to listen to all this training. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate any feedback that you've got. If you want, you can leave a note at the end, or you can contact me directly.